Hi, I'm Neil Saunders and welcome to this week's edition of Retail Perspectives. This week I want to have a look at the current state of the consumer because we're seeing some fairly interesting trends come through in terms of how the consumer is feeling, the economics of the consumer and how that's impacting upon the retail sector. I think one of the most positive things that we've seen for the start of this year is that real disposable incomes for consumers are starting to rise. Now they're only rising very slightly, but that is a marked change from where we have been for quite a long time during the downturn, when we've seen a quite severe contraction in real disposable incomes, both because of suppressed wage settlements and of course because of inflation. Now we're seeing both of those trends moderate, so inflation is coming down in the headline rate, prices are still rising, but they're rising by a much less rapid rate than they once were. And wage settlements, although they're not increasing at very robust rates, have started to tick up. And the net effect of that is actually we have got, for the first time, some moderate, and they are very moderate, but they are rises in consumer income. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that people are going to rush out and spend because the rises are not sufficient to drive that type of activity. But one thing it has done is it's boosted confidence because, of course, people have seen a little bit more disposable income in their pockets, they've seen a little bit more in some instances in their take-home pay, and they've seen prices moderate slightly in terms of the increases that are coming through. So we've seen consumer sentiment tick up, and for the first time in our tracker since the onset of the downturn, consumer sentiment in January was in positive territory, which is a really encouraging sign as we go into 2014. Interestingly though, because we are starting to see the green shoots of recovery come through, one of the things that consumers are more concerned about now than they perhaps were are interest rates. And we've seen here a very sharp rise in the number of people who think at some point in the next 6 months to a year rates will increase. Now, of course, the Bank of England have given guidance to say that that's unlikely and they're most likely to hold rates for at least this year and perhaps into 2015 as well. But in some senses, the Bank of England saying that doesn't actually matter to consumers who feel that rates are going to rise. And the interesting thing we've seen out of those consumers who are a little bit fearful around rates, because of course they think their mortgage repayments or their debt repayments are going to go up, is some of that slight increase in disposable income isn't actually being filtered through into retail spend, it's being put aside and saved. So actually, the fact that people fear an interest rate rise is perhaps driving a slightly more cautious mindset, and it means not all of the benefit of disposable income increases are finding their way through to the retail sector. But nevertheless, the picture is an encouraging one as we go into 2014, because from the consumer point of view, from the macroeconomic point of view on unemployment, on inflation, on disposable income, and on things like housing transactions, there are a lot of positive movements. The net effect of that is that retail is inevitably in 2014 going to be a much healthier place, and it's going to be a much more interesting place in terms of growth. The difficult thing though is as we do get into 2015 and that recovery builds momentum, it's likely that interest rates will rise at some point. They have to go up, they'll probably only go up by a moderate level, but then we might see a little bit of heat taken out of the consumer and we might see a little bit more pressure ease back on disposable income as people have to pay more to service the debts that they still have and that they've still built up. But that really is something we believe is a problem for next year rather than this year. This year, despite what most consumers think, they're still going to benefit from low interest rates. So retail is going to benefit from that, not fully because of that savings picture, but at least in part. And that means 2014 is probably going to be the first year when we see quite continuous positive consumer sentiment and see that translated through in some degree into retail spending growth.